Okay, folks. Well, today last time we were together, it's been a couple of weeks, but last time we were together, we were reading, we kind of did chapter 21, and then we did a little bit of chapter 22, and I thought that what we would do was kind of refresh ourselves and reread chapter 22, and then talk about it a little bit more. Yeah, talk about chapter 22 a little bit more. It's like I mentioned last time. It's kind of a pivotal chapter that is just so deep and powerful. But like I said, I feel like I'm at a loss to discuss it real well. But I'm going to do the best I can. So let's see what we've got here. I will read for us chapter 22. Okay. Genesis chapter 22. And it came to be after these events that Elohim tried Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. He said, Take your son now, your only son, Yitzchak, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as an ascending offering on one of the mountains which I command you. And Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Yitzchak his son. And he split the wood for the ascending offering, and arose and went to the place which Elohim had commanded him. And on the 3rd day Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place from a distance. So Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey, while the boy and I go over there and worship, and come back to you. And Abraham took the wood of the ascending offering and laid it on Yitzchak his son, and he took the fire in his hand and a knife, and the 2 of them went together. And Yitzchak spoke to Abraham his father and said, My father. And he said, Here I am, my son. And he said, Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for an ascending offering? And Abraham said, My son, Elohim does provide for himself the lamb for an ascending offering. And the 2 of them went on together, and they came to the place which Elohim had commanded him, and Abraham built a slaughter place there, and placed the wood in order. And he bound Yitzchak his son, and laid him on the slaughter place upon the wood. And Abraham stretched out his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. But the messenger of Adonai called to him from the heavens, and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Do not lay your hand on the boy, nor touch him, for now I know that you fear Elohim, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted his eyes and looked, and saw behind him a ram caught in a bush by its horns. And Abraham went and took the ram, and offered it up for an ascending offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of the place Adonai Yireh, as it is said to this day, On the mountain Adonai provides. And the messenger of Adonai called to Abraham a 2nd time from the heavens, and said, By myself I have sworn, declares Adonai, because you have done this, and have not withheld your son, your only son, that I shall certainly bless you, and I shall certainly increase your seed as the stars of the heavens, and as the sand which is on the seashore, and let your seed possess the gate of their enemies. And in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. Then Abraham returned to his young men, and they rose up and went together to Beer-sheva. And Abraham dwelt at Beer-sheva. And it came to be after these events that it was reported to Abraham, saying, Behold, Milcah too has borne children to your brother Nahor. Uz his firstborn, and Buz his brother, Kemuel, the father of Aram, and Chesed, and Hazo, and Pildash, and Yildaph, and Bethuel. And Bethuel brought forth Rivkah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother, and his concubine, whose name was Reumah, also bore Teba, and Gaham, and Tahash, and Maacah. So there we have Genesis chapter 22. Now, I want to... How is everyone? Okay, don't fall asleep on me now. It's okay if you do, I'm kidding. So I wanted to first say that we briefly talked last time about some of the really interesting verbiage that was used here, like an alternate reading of some Hebrew words about the ram caught in its horn, which was kind of interesting. What was that, Angela?
I still have it on the board.
Another fastened on a tree with or in his power.
Yes, another fastened to a tree by his own power.
And where was that there?
That is, I think that's verse 12. I could be wrong.
13.
Is it 13? Okay, yeah.
I was trying to find that first word, the ahar word, ahar.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't find where that was another. Is it just those letters with different vowel points or something?
Yes, I think it is. That's one of the things that kind of sucks about the Strong's Concordance is that if there's a word.
I didn't find it in Strong's. It was a different.
I was looking
Just
at Brown Drivers trying to find
It wasn't that.
Yeah, I
Was
find
it
the
same
same.
letters, just a different word kind of thing.
Yeah, I find yes, it's a different. It's exactly the same letters. Well, there's no vowel points, but it's a lot of times that you will find that when you see the same exact word with the same letters written out, it is actually potentially a verb form instead of a noun form, or a noun form instead of a verb form. But it's also entirely possible to have the exact same word written the same way. It's just pronounced differently. And the Masoretic text has a different vowel point, and it'll be a completely different word, but it's spelled exactly the same way. And it's hard to find that in a Brown Driver Briggs or in the Strong's Concordance, because it's not exactly a dictionary. Angela?
Yeah, back when we were doing Matthew, I read this one guy was talking about the 70 faces of Torah,
Oh, yeah.
and he said that when you put vowel points on these words, you take away some of the depth. Because you automatically take away some of the depth of meaning, because you automatically take a word and you take away half of what it could be, and you make it mean, you force it into a whole, which is not even close to what happens when you go ahead and put an English word to it. That inhibits it even more.
Yeah, and frankly, I'm not really certain about how to find these things. I'm hearing about them from other Torah scholars who are, they know Hebrew better than I do, and they're saying, this word can also mean this, and I'm having to look it up and go, well, okay, where's that word? And then I'll look it up and I'll find it, and I'll see it's exactly the same Hebrew word. It's just not linked to your concordance dictionary.
Yeah, sorry, Mike, I didn't look into this deeper when we were talking about it, but it's Strong's 312 is the other one that's spelled the same way. Hebrews 312. And so what I've started doing because of that is I'll look at my Strong's and I'll see the word and I'll just kind of scroll to the left or to the right on my phone, or if you have the book, just go above it or below it and look at, are they spelled the same? Because you could have some potential,
Yes.
And
Well, so you said that's 312?
Yeah.
And this one's 310. So it's likely that if it's the same word, it's going to be
right
near it. So yeah, if you have a concordance which is listing them straight, then you'll be able to see it. But a lot of us are using these concordances that are electronic, and they don't show the ones before and after.
And Hebrew doesn't work the same way as English. Like if there's a root word for a Hebrew word, this Hebrew word has something to do with that root word.
Right.
It's connected to that word.
Right.
So we can see that in like the word parable, and you see the same spelling for authority. And Messiah tells a parable, and then they're shocked because he taught as one with authority.
Yeah.
So you can see the connection to these Hebrew words. If you have this understanding of this language, it's just super rich.
Yeah.
But we don't want to limit ourselves either. Like
Yeah. Absolutely. Angela, I apologize.
Well, when I've been doing the cards, the flashcards, there's a website, I think it's just called Old Testament Hebrew. It has all the words listed in alphabetical order. And so you can very easily see that there'll be like 4 in a row that have and they don't put vowel points on them, that are spelled the exact same way, and then they'll have the phonetic, and you'll see that they're said different ways. And it's a real convenient and then you can click on it and it'll take you to where in the Bible it's used. But I think that's where I found that. And so it'll lump in all these other meanings because they've taken the vowel points off.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder when they did all the work on keying these kind of concordance, how they came to the decisions that this particular verse meant.
Yeah.
They used the word
You know,
this way.
that's interesting that that we're talking about this, because I was doing a little bit of research this week, and I found some things that were interesting, because I know that a lot of Hebrew roots, Messianic Judaism teachers who teach on this passage, a lot of them are going back to the book of Galatians to tie these things together, like we did briefly a week or so ago when we were talking about, Paul coming up with this analogy about two covenants. And they pointed out something in regards to the Hebrew language and even the Greek language, and it's about these people who are basically putting together these dictionaries. They're called lexicographers, and they have to determine. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Oxford English Dictionary. That is an incredibly powerful thing that I had no idea. I mean, I was always a guy who, read Webster's dictionary, or there's some really good dictionaries, but I had no idea when I found the Oxford English Dictionary how incredibly powerful this resource was. They're very, very expensive, and you can usually only get them in colleges, because it's a huge set. There's like big books that are just for the letter A. And if you find a word like apple, for example, it will give you not only every possible meaning for that word, but what is its history? Where did it come from in the English language? Is it related to Greek, Latin, French, Hebrew? It'll tell you what is the origin of that word and how has it been used throughout history. So you'll find several pages just on the word apple. And it's really, really fascinating. But then you can find that same kind of thing with the Hebrew and with the Greek. Because, for example, when Paul talks about circumcision in the book of Galatians, what these lexicographers have to do is not only look at the Bible as far as what this Greek word for circumcision means, but other writings of the first century, like Josephus and Philo, and even Greek philosophers and different texts, historical research to find out what possible contexts are there for using this word. And you can see that if you have a preconceived idea about what a word means, like circumcision, or even Passover, it was one of the things I was looking at was circumcision and Passover. Those two words can have vastly different meanings in Greek. As far as like a Passover could be talking about the week of unleavened bread. It could be talking about the feast that's happening the night of the 14th. It could be talking about the lamb itself. There's so many different connotations just for the word Pascha. And the word circumcision can mean multiple different things, not just the physical act of circumcision, but the Judaizers are called the circumcision, or just circumcision. So these key words have a lot of connotation which we really wouldn't know. And if we just plug in what our dictionary says or what our preconceived idea of what a word is, you can get really, really confused about the writings of Paul, for example, because he uses terms and phrases that are quite different than you might think they are. And that helps explain Paul so much better in relation to especially what we were talking about a couple weeks ago in regards to these two covenants that are talked about with Hagar and Ishmael and Isaac, and it's kind of interesting. But I'd really encourage you to maybe look at that website that Angela was talking about that give you some different ideas about that, and maybe I will have to look and see if I can find some good resources for dictionaries that will give us a better understanding, but it takes a little bit of work. And there it is.
And we've talked before about concordances, that they're not dictionaries, but
Right.
basically, Strong's I think is a huge, huge gift.
Oh,
And-
absolutely.
But what he did was he looked at, I'm assuming, I think it was the King James, So that's what he logged it to.
Right.
And saw where this word is translated.
Right.
So basically it's saying everywhere this word it appears, this is what it could mean.
Right.
Because he's just pulling what it's translated as.
And that's powerful in itself.
Yeah.
You know, that's what's really powerful about the Strong's is not only does it give you its own little definitions, and those definitions are usually linked to all of the passages below where it says, well, in this verse it's used in this way, and then in this verse it could be used in a different way. So that's really insightful and very powerful to be able to look at where everywhere in the Torah and in the prophets and the writings that this word is used.
Yeah.
And you can, if you want to do a word study or a word research, you know, that's the way to do it, is to look at it yourself in the context and say, what does it mean in this context? And you can get all these different variations of that.
I'm not sure where I heard this from, but I had it written in here because you talk about word meanings, but also culturally the thought behind some of these things, which is interesting. And for this particular word, ahav, the thought was that you are going forward and walking that path, but there's stuff coming behind you that you can't see. And because you can't see that, their thought is it's like your future is behind you.
Yeah.
And it's coming. So it's actually does just like this says with what Angela did, point to Yeshua.
Yeah, that's an interesting insight. You know, this is one of the things that I really had to learn when I was in college, you know, studying to be a historian, was the historical context and what does the word mean to the person who wrote it. That's the most critical thing. It doesn't matter what a word or phrase or something means to you, or what it meant to people in the 1800s, or what it meant to the compilers of the King James Bible. It's irrelevant. What did it mean to the person who wrote it? The historical context is critical. And, you know, you guys heard of Alfred Edersheim? He has done a lot of research into first century life in Israel. And in fact, many of you are using like eSword or something like that, My Sword, some of these little programs that you're using on your tablets and your phones, you know, to look at the Bible. They have Alfred Edersheim's Sketches is a book that is free on a lot of those pieces of software. You know, if you go to your download section and you tell it you're looking for dictionaries or different Bible translations, they'll have commentaries and also just books. Alfred Edersheim's Sketches of Jewish Life in the First Century is a really, really amazing piece of insight that gives you a lot of information about what life was like. And it's an interesting read just by itself, so check into that. It's free. You know what else I came across this week, which was kind of neat, is that, you know, you sometimes look for old books. Maybe it's the Book of Enoch or the Book of Jasher or some of these, you know, Apocrypha or something like that. You can find copies online for free. There are actually, people have turned them into apps. So if you go to the Apple Store or the Google Play, you just type in Josephus or something, and there's an app there that has all of the works of Josephus in a format that's ready for your phone. So you can find all different kinds of works, the Mishnah, the Talmud, those are some of the most powerful things is the Mishnah and the parts of the Gemara and stuff which date to the time of Yeshua. They give you a lot of insight into first century thought. That's just so critical, you know, to do a little bit of historical research. And I find it particularly fascinating myself. I've always been a huge fan of history, but that's just me. Any other comments or questions about that? I think that's a good little bunch of pieces of nuggets of wisdom about your Bible study, you know, to help you out. Tracy?
I was just seeing you're meditating on what Carla just said about what's behind you is your future. I mean, is that what you said?
Yeah, it's
Because
it indicates your future when you can't see what's behind you.
yeah, and I think this is like something, I even had a dream about something similar to this, that, you know how James talks about the word being a mirror. I was just talking to Jason about this, but you look into this mirror and you're seeing, if you just look at it and you're a hearer only and you don't let it inform you and get into you and do what it says, then you forget who you are. When you look at it, it's a mirror, because ultimately Messiah is taking us back to the garden. That our past, what's behind us, is actually our future. And that's where we're heading, you know. just like really that what you said is like that kind of put it together for me.
Yeah. History is prophecy.
And if you're not looking into this word as something that can change you or affect you, as this is me and how, what can I do for you and how can I learn, then it's
you're
not,
missing a
it's
big
just,
chunk.
Yeah, you're missing out. It's
Yeah. Absolutely.
You're just looking at your flesh. This is what I'm trying to say. If you look in a mirror and just look at your flesh,
You're looking at the inside of your
that's
eyelids.
a hearer only and not a doer of the word. But if you look into it and you're looking into the spirit of it, now you can really see.
Well, look behind you.
Mm-hmm.
Look
behind
at
you.
your face. Look at what's going on.
Exactly, and that's what I'm getting from what you said. I just thought that's awesome.
cool.
And it's a big chiasm when you think about it. It's
Sure.
just like, and who's in the middle of it? Messiah, the 4,000th year. Hello.
Oh my gosh.
Absolutely. And, I always think about what Paul said, these things were written for our instruction upon whom the end of the ages have come. The tests in the wilderness and all of these stories that we're reading in the Torah are prophecies for us. They're not only instructive as far as morality or, to find the Messiah hidden in there. They're certainly powerful in that way, but when you kind of look at it from chiastic structures and just themes and ideas, you can really see how it applies to your life. And I think that's the most important thing, is figuring out how does this apply to me? What can I do with this information?
That's wisdom.
That is wisdom. It absolutely is. Gracie?
That's where I'm usually stumped, is that we'll go home and be talking about everything we were talking about here. And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, so how is this going to flesh out in my walk today? So I get sometimes huge overload. And I'm like, this is good and this is just awesome. The Lord is, to make the biggest understatement you can possibly make, He's awesome.
You're right.
At the same time, I'm me.
Yeah.
And I have to just get to the point where I'm just alone with the Lord and I say, Lord, this is fabulous.
Yeah.
I'm not knocking it, but how does this relate to me?
Yeah.
How does this relate to how I cook the meals or do the laundry or go get the groceries or visit my neighbor? That it's got to.
It has to come down to that level.
The Lord left me here after I've been learning is to use what He's teaching me.
Right.
And I have a very full sponge.
Sure.
And it needs to be distributing
and
what
you
the
know
Lord
what?
wants me to distribute.
You know what, Gracie? I would encourage you always to, at any time, any of you, to stop me and say, Alan, this is all fabulous, but what does this have to do with me and how am I going to use this? Remind me always, because that's what I'm trying to remind myself, is to not just put, because we can be drinking out of a fire hose here. Believe me, we've been drinking out of a fire hose for years now, and you're just getting overwhelmed, and you can lose track of what am I going to do with this information, Mike?
Sometimes it's not about you or about us, right? Like sometimes it's information that loads your seed bag. Because you never know what conversation or where it's going to apply later.
That's true.
So
That's
all
true.
of that information is
It's there for a reason.
profitable.
Sure.
And if nothing else, it's to just, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. When you get all this deep information no man could have possibly put together, it's witnessing to you, and it's building your faith.
True.
So if nothing else, that's enough.
Yeah, there is an invisible work that's going on there, and I wouldn't discount that at all. But I agree, Gracie, that we really do somehow always need to say, is there something that I can do with this information? Maybe I'm not aware of it right now. Maybe it's just being stored back there in my seed bank for use later, or it's building me spiritually in some way that I'm not yet aware of. Because I think it's all profitable in many different ways. But I agree with you that I really want to be, shoe leather with it as much as possible, for sure.
I think that scripture that says all scripture is given by inspiration of God. It's profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be perfect, thoroughly furnished unto all good works.
Right.
So it's supposed to be, I like what he said about that seed bag. I never thought of it. That's cool. But really, I got one full sea bag.
I agree.
Let's
Let's get sewing it.
What I wanted to say too is read Proverbs 2, and that I call that the How to Be Good Soil chapter, because it teaches you, my son, incline your ear to my word, cry out for discernment, and you'll receive understanding. And then it tells you more and more and more about that. But this is, if you're not constantly crying out for discernment and understanding, that's a problem. We need to constantly be saying, guide me, help me understand this. If I don't understand something, he should be the one we go to first to ask. And if he doesn't give you the answer right away, then it's not time for you to know.
Sure.
This is my thought on
I
that.
think and I think sometimes we can get a little heady as well, and feel maybe a little arrogant, like, man, I'm learning so much cool stuff, and I know so much stuff now, and it's like we forget to ask God, what am I supposed to do with this
For
stuff?
understanding. And he will give it to you.
He will.
give it to you.
But we can get a little wrapped around the axle sometimes, thinking we know so much cool stuff. And
But one more thing too is that Mike and I have been talking about this lately. It's just we hear so often, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me," and people say this all the time, and they believe it when it comes to physical feats. You can help me climb this mountain. You can help me do this. Why would you not think it applies to helping you understand this word? Because that really is what it's about.
Sure.
Without me, you can do nothing. Abide in me, abide in my word, and you will produce much fruit.
Right.
That's all about hearing the word and doing it. So he gives you that understanding, and if you believe that you can do all things through this word who strengthens you, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Even if it brings disunity.
Yep. He will.
Well,
He
it
will.
is. He came to bring a sword, and the word is sharper than a sword, and a sword cuts things up. It can bring disunity.
Can cut pretty deep.
It can cut
He
deep.
can understand this word.
That is true. That is true.
Not too hard for him.
Yeah, we just got to make sure it's His word that is cutting, and not each other.
Really up to it, folks. Brain transplant here.
I think that the last thing that I mentioned last time we were together was that this thing here in verse 2, where it says, "Take your son now, your only son Yitzchak, whom you love," that is the first time the word love is used in the Torah. And we know the rule of first mention teaches us to pay attention to these things, and I think that it definitely, we want to keep that in mind. It's so neat that the first time the word love is used, the Hebrew word ahav, is in relation to a father and his only son whom he loves. And that this is so instructive for us, that in this section we have Abraham being willing to sacrifice his son to God. And that this is obviously a prophetic picture of God being willing to give up his son for us. And I think it's, being willing to sacrifice and understand what sacrifice is, and that is to give up something that we love for something that we love more. Because remember that there are, multiple times in the Torah and in the writings where it's like people are talking about, you can't offer something, you can't sacrifice something that doesn't have value to you. That if it's something that doesn't have value, it's not worth anything. It's like, it's actually, it's tied in with chapter 23, for example, where Ephron the Hittite tries to give this land to Abraham. He's like, no, I ain't taking it for free. Or Nan the Jebusite, offering David, stuff, the oxen and the stuff for free to make an offering to God. He's like, I'm not making an offering to God that costs me nothing. It's not going to work. So love is pictured here as the love that a father has for his only begotten son. And it's just such a powerful principle, such a powerful prophetic word, and it teaches us the definition of sacrifice and love. Tracy?
You can see the clear connection to the Father and Messiah, and I think a good cross-reference there would be John 3:16.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a picture of what's taking place here, is that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son.
Yeah. And you can see that all over this section. I mean, there's just little words and phrases that are, and I think it's interesting too, where he goes to Mount Moriah, and we see that, Adonai Yireh, and that word Yireh is all over this passage, and sometimes translated as provide. Sometimes it's translated as see or to be seen. I think that's more important. I think that you know there's something interesting and prophetic and really deeply spiritual about continuously translating that word as see in this passage. I probably should have, and I do that sometimes. I will actually, in order to prove a point for you guys, I'll take that word and I'll translate it one way continuously throughout so that you can begin to see what the deeper meaning might be. And I would encourage you to maybe underline those words here in your text where you see the word provide. God will provide for himself, but it actually could maybe better be translated, God does see for himself.
It is, I would say for sure, in my opinion, because if you cross-reference this chapter with Exodus 3, when Moses sees the bush,
Right.
it's exactly the same practice.
Yep.
I mean, it's Yahovah sees, Moses sees, so we have this parallel. Abraham sees a ram and a thicket, and Moses sees fire and a thorn bush, and it's specific about, and he turned aside to see, and it's repetitive. And Yahovah saw him see, and it's just really neat. I encourage you to read that chapter.
Absolutely. And I don't think there's anything wrong with the word provide. I think that that's also a good translation, but I just think that it doesn't give you maybe the deeper understanding of the word seeing and how it's related in this
And it's
passage.
something about this mountain, too.
Yeah, absolutely. Angela?
The link between see and provide is, if you put it this way, if you said, I will see to it. So
Yes.
it kind of is.
In fact, some of the translations actually translate it that way.
God will see to it.
God will see to it. Because, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a good insight. I wanted to also, we spoke briefly about the ascending offering, the olah, and how it is potentially possible that Abraham saw this and interpreted it one way when God was simply making a different type of statement. I want you to bring your son to this mountain and make him go up. Because the word olah means to go up. This is where you get the word aliyah, going up. But I think it might be instructive, and it occurred to me as I was studying this week, that not only is it kind of interesting to see that maybe God did not intend for Abraham to sacrifice this child, otherwise he could have. I mean, certainly Abraham interpreted it that way, but God obviously stopped him because he did not intend for him to kill this child. For what purpose do you think God actually asked him to sacrifice this child? Now he didn't actually tell him to sacrifice a child. He said, make him go up. What do you think God's purpose was? Why would he tell him this?
The fear of Yahweh was the most important thing.
Yes.
That was the biggest thing he was concerned with was, does Abraham fear me?
Yes.
And I know, it means respect. I don't know.
Well, later he says the same thing about obedience. So it's,
Right.
I know you fear me because you obeyed my voice. That's
Right.
basically what's being said.
Right. So I think that, Gracie, go ahead.
Well, it's just that God was well aware
Yes.
of Abraham's obeisance to him.
Right.
I think
Who
he wanted
wasn't?
Abraham to see.
Yes. I think this is all for the sake of Abraham,
Right.
not God. It's like God knew exactly where Abraham's heart was, but maybe
Yes.
Abraham didn't know exactly where Abraham's heart was.
Maybe in addition to that, it was so Isaac could see.
Yeah.
So that way it was strengthening the bond not only between Adonai and Abraham, but also Abraham and Isaac, and set the example for Isaac that
Yeah.
the rewards for the fear of the obedience.
Is resurrection to life.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Angela?
I think what he did helped contrast his nature with what I think people in that culture thought God wanted from them, because I don't think it was, I think the pagan gods would, they'd ask you to kill your kids. And so here's God saying, no, down, whether it be intentional, doesn't matter, because the way that went down, he fully contrasted himself as being not like them, the other gods at all.
Yeah.
And he says that later, I think in one of the prophets, talks about them sacrificing their children in the fire. That
Yeah.
never came into my mind.
Would have
nor
never
that
entered my mind. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Do not
right.
worship me the way the Gentiles worship their gods.
Exactly.
That's right. That's
Not
right.
them.
Yep.
He does the same thing.
Well, you know, yeah, yeah.
Every single plague is
About
in your face.
Yeah.
Judging their gods.
Yeah.
Yep,
Every
absolutely.
single one.
Well, and I think that, you know, I started looking at this, you know, this word olah, or olah, talking about making things go up, and I thought, okay, so maybe there's something interesting here about why God would ask him to do that. And I started looking at the first few times in the Torah when this word is used. And I thought that there was some potentially interesting insight here. Let me run by you the first few times that this word is used in the Torah and the instances in which it was used, and you can maybe see something happening here. The first time that this word is used is in Genesis 8:20, where Noah is making offerings to God after the flood. This is, you know, where he takes a few of the clean animals and he offers them up to God, and then God establishes this covenant with him, the covenant of the rainbow and such. So that's number one. That's the first time that this word olah is used. The second time that we see this word used in its ritual sense is in Exodus. Well, so actually the second time is here, but in a ritual sense where they're talking about an offering. The next time is in Exodus chapter 24, verse 5, where the people are being sealed in the covenant at Sinai. The third time that this is used is where the people are making offerings in Exodus 32, verse 6, to the golden calf. So we have Noah making offerings to God after a great salvation and after a covenant is made. We have the children of Israel being sealed after the covenant is made and after a great salvation during the Exodus. And then we have this issue of idolatry and the golden calf. What do you make of those? Do you think there's something there, or am I just grasping at straws? I could be. I'm perfectly willing to accept that. But do you think there might be something there? There might be. I don't know what it is. I wish I could tell you. I think that it is possible that there, maybe going back to Paul, there seems to be two issues of a covenant being made, a righteous covenant, a saving covenant, being made between God and his people, Noah and the children of Israel at Sinai. But then there's also this covenant of death, which is made to the golden calf in an incidence of strange idolatry, which is kind of going back to, for example, you know, people offering up their children to Molech, for example. And it could be that there is some type of a link here, that maybe the Apostle Paul would pick up on something like this and say, in fact, it might be something that he saw that kind of said that, you know, this is the covenant of death. Because that golden calf incident certainly reminds me of a covenant of death. And it just could be related to Galatians chapter 4 if you think about it. Angela?
When you were talking about that and covenants, I was thinking, you know, when you're sitting there watching a wedding, there's all this stuff that happens and stuff that's said, and there's kissing and rings and stuff. But what's the thing that actually makes it official? Is it when you say I do? And maybe that's what this is the equivalent of when you're in a covenant with God. Is this just you saying I do?
Uh-huh.
And it's kind of,
Yeah.
I don't know,
That's what Israel said.
the thing.
They
The
did.
thing
They
where
said I do, yeah.
it
Mike?
becomes funky.
I don't know how it would relate, but with the things that you're talking about here, about the going up and the two covenants and stuff, the ram that's offered instead, that word takath is got two taws on either side of the head, right? So you've got these two covenants.
The two crosses with life in the middle?
Right.
Yes.
And so you've got the kind of that same picture of the two covenants, and the translation, because it's offered instead, is bottom or underneath instead of Isaac.
That's interesting because that's what we were taught. Remember we were studying with Joseph, and they had in the mouth of the sack, it was umtaket, which was underneath. There was something mysterious about that in the mouth of their sacks where they had their money that Joseph kept giving back to them. That was something interesting. It's interesting you said that word because that reminded me of that word. Did somebody else have something?
I was going to say something about, I think what we're seeing is a pattern of spiritual lessons being given to Abraham, and like he teaching him, like we talked about circumcision, all these things. What is he really telling him? And I think it's related to what Peter's saying in 1 Peter 2:5 when he's talking about us being built up as living stones, as spiritual house, a set apart priesthood to offer up spiritual offerings acceptable to Elohim through Yeshua Messiah. So I don't know exactly what that means, but I think we can apply it to ourselves and say, okay, you know, if there's anything, I think that what the sacrificial system represented too was saying, my flesh is here. This could be me. That this would be me, and I'm putting my flesh on the altar.
That's what you see in the Jewish commentaries for a whole burnt offering, is that the offerer is saying, this is my heart, that I am putting myself on the altar. Everything that I have, everything that I am, I'm offering it up to you. I'm making myself go up. They do absolutely view the whole burnt offering in that way, and I think that that's totally
And what
applicable.
I desire obedience, not sacrifice.
Right.
Go and learn what this means. You know,
Right.
I think that's what we're really looking at here. It's, we're so in the flesh that it's hard for us to understand that. But the more we let that word get in us, the more we let it inform us and teach us, and let the Messiah teach us through the Spirit, we can see what He really desires from us.
And I think that this incident of Abraham being obedient and being willing to walk with the heart that is not being legalistic, just trying to by rote go through, because I think that shows in that God said, I want you to make him go up to me, that Abraham takes that literally, and sometimes we need to take these things literally and say, this is what I need to do. But there's also a deeper spiritual principle, and I think that you can see both at work here.
Totally.
And I think that and it does relate to perhaps Galatians, where Paul's talking about this covenant of death and this covenant of life. And as something occurred to me, and I made a couple of notes to myself here, is that the life covenant is for those who grab a hold of the Torah in faith and walk it out by faith. And the other is for those who take on the Torah through a sense of legalism to bear fruit for death. And that in the same way that the commandment is a lamp and the Torah is the light of the lamp, the sin is like a serpent. And the venom that kills is the Torah. Because that's when you talk about Paul talking about the Torah bringing death, it does bring death. It does definitely bring death and condemnation if you grab it the wrong way.
In the flesh.
You grab
that's
it.
why it says the letter kills, because the letter is the only part the flesh can understand.
That's right.
That's the only part the flesh can. Anybody can pick it up and read it. The flesh. But only through Messiah
Right.
can you understand it.
That's right.
The spirit of it.
You got to get to the spirit of it, and I think that we've talked about this too over the years. That I think many of you have also discussed this and agreed that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is the Torah.
It's Messiah.
The tree of the knowledge of good and evil is the Torah. You can grab it from the wrong end, and it'll bite you. But if you grab it from the correct end, it's life.
Kind of like a sword.
It is like a sword. It is two-edged, absolutely.
And understanding that Messiah and the Torah are the same thing.
Yeah,
They are together. They're not separate.
right.
They have to be together.
And that's why you can find some perhaps conflicting reports of the Messiah saying, I came to bring life and peace, but I also came to bring sword and division. There's like conflicting statements there. If you are walking in the light of the truth, you are going to be at odds with people who are not. There's going to be conflict. And I think you can see that, especially since you guys have come to the knowledge of the Messiah in the Torah and have begun to walk that out. there's been more division in your lives since that time than ever before.
And it's he's specific there too about being people that are close to your family when
Sure.
he says that. And I think that's for no reason, because that seems to be where you feel the most division.
And you know that, and it never made sense to me how the Messiah would say the members of a man's own household are against him, and the brother is turned against brother, and you know, husband against wife, and I mean all of this division and turning each other over to be flogged. And I was like, how is that possible? I've never seen that, because there's this great big, I don't want to call it unity, it's uniformity among the religious folk. They just like live and let live. We all have the same thing. We're all the same people. It's no
Until we
big deal.
start learning something
Same
else.
God.
Until you make yourself holy by saying, I have made you holy, and I intend for you to walk in a manner that preserves that holiness. When you start doing that, then you're starting to stick out like a sore thumb, and people are, oh, you think you're cool, huh? Yeah, you got something special? Let me knock you down a peg. And
supposed to be the authority.
well, and that's where we have to be learning to walk humbly, because we can, and I think all of us have had this, where we started learning the Bible and we decided we were going to beat people over the head with it. We did that. And you know what? I think we learned, hopefully we learned, that it is not to be used in that way. It's best to keep your mouth shut and live according to the truth and walk in it, and let people ask you, what is the reason for the hope that is in you? We've learned, I know a lot of us have learned, don't go beating people over the head with your learning.
Let your light so shine so that they may hear your good works. No, it's so they see your good works.
That's right. Yeah, don't let them hear your good
exactly
work.
what
That's it.
Jason
It made me
was
think of
describing.
Jason. It's
You're
exactly
letting-
what it
that is
made me
letting
think
your
of.
light shine. You're letting that inform you, and you're walking it out, and they're seeing it, and they're going, what? Oh, and it affects other people.
Yep.
And draws them back to the Father.
Yep, I absolutely agree.
Light on the hill.
That's right. We need to be a light, not talk about the light. Yep.
But we can talk about it. Yeah.
We can talk about it with each other
Well, you have to talk about it to them too, right?
No, it's but it's
if they ask. If they ask. No, I think.
People asking that got us in trouble at Grace Bible.
Well, you know what, and I think that we have to be as gentle as doves and yet as wise as serpents, so that when they ask, you don't just say, let me let you have it. You kind of say something very subtly and humbly.
I'm going to pass this little nugget on. I mean,
Throw out your nugget.
I wish I heard this a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I think there's something to it, because I'm studying this parable of the sower, and how whatever seed is in you is the fruit you produce. So you're producing the fruit of the word, and that's what good soil does. It hears the word, understands it, and bears much fruit.
Mm-hmm.
The fruits are your works, things you do.
Mm-hmm.
So in the Torah, if you understand that the seed is the word of God and let that inform the parables, in the Torah he talks to Israel and says, when you go into the land, you plant every kind of goodly tree and fruit tree. Don't eat of it. It's like the third year. I
Right.
can't remember exactly, but it's uncircumcised fruit.
Yeah.
The fourth year it's holy. The fifth year you can eat of it.
Right.
So if you think about that, and then Paul, I think there's a reason why when he got the truth, the good news, and the Messiah, and went away for 3 years before he even came back to talk to the disciples.
13 years.
13.
He was gone for 13 years.
My Bible says 3.
Well, he went away for a little time, and then he came back, and then he went away again. I
Yeah.
think the whole time that he was gone was like 13 years.
But I think I'm sure he waited a certain amount of time, whether it was
Right.
3, 5, whatever, to actually start doing what he was supposed to do.
Yeah.
Did you see something in the scripture that says he's waited 13 years before he started?
No.
Okay.
No.
Because that would deflate what I'm saying. But
No.
Which might be, but
No,
I'm
I
just-
totally. I think that's a good insight.
It could be what he's. I don't know if that's what he's doing now. My point is, I know that I'm much different from now than when I was then, and you get to this point where you think like you said, you get a lot of knowledge, you get a lot of information, and it starts to puff you up.
Yeah.
And you want to tell people, whether you know it or not, you want to tell people. I think it's a lot like Joseph with his dream. Look at this dream I had. And his brothers were like, no. And they don't receive it. So it's just, when you get to be a mature tree, that is when it just clicks. You
That's
get
a
it.
good insight about men and women being like trees and the fruit of that tree.
Just let
You know, well, you
get some
can
time.
see like you know, in the pastoral letters of Paul to like Timothy, for example, you know, the qualifications for an elder and such. It's like not a new believer lest he become puffed up and think more highly of himself than he ought to. So you know, and that could be related to, you know, everybody thinks, well, yeah, no, I know that when we learn things or we first come to the knowledge of the truth, we get excited and we want to share those things. And that's great because that's so powerful. There's nothing like infectious excitement that can maybe perk other people's interest. And I don't want to discount that at all. But how ignorant are we when we're just fresh off the bat? You know, we've just sprouted this little seed out of the ground and we're like, you know.
And I think there's a difference between I think the fruit is representative of teaching.
Yeah.
So don't go out there teaching things that you may not quite fully understand.
Sure.
Because I thought I got something, and then a little later, be like, I only got part of that.
Yeah.
You know. Even
Absolutely.
now, you know,
yeah.
every as long as you keep growing, you're gonna produce
Yes.
more fruit.
Right.
You know.
Right. And it's, you know, it's about being patient and about learning. Jerry?
Because that thing with Paul in it was 13 years or 15 years, whatever it was. After that time was up, he went back to Jerusalem, got together with the apostles,
To see if he had
compared
been
notes.
right.
He
He wanted to find out if he had been
never
running in
talked,
vain.
Theology with them up until that point,
Right.
and yet they were both groups were teaching the same thing.
Right.
So he got
Exactly.
all of his word from Revelation.
Right.
They got theirs from the feet of the Master.
Right.
And that
But
is
the same thing.
proof of what the Spirit does for His disciples
witnesses.
today, for us
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
You need no man teach you. That's not saying we shouldn't listen to each other and go and listen to, you know, wise people.
Sure, sure.
But we need our first priority to be getting in this word and let him, the teacher, teach you. He died so that you could go straight to the Father. Why wouldn't you take advantage of that?
Yep. Yep.
You ever stop and
Absolutely.
think how much Paul had to relearn? Oh, an incredibly intelligent man, and totally learned at the top of the whole spectrum there of learning, and yet he was against God, Christ.
Yeah.
He didn't know. But then that same scripture that he had basically memorized, the whole Torah,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
he went and spent time alone with the Lord
With an unveiled face.
and
That's right.
learned what it really meant.
Yep.
Yeah.
He
It's
needed
incredible.
to learn the spiritual truths of what he
Yeah.
knew already. Absolutely.
And he
Absolutely.
still confounded everybody.
He did.
Oh, and you said something about
Still
patience, teaching that's part of the good fruit. Bear
Yeah.
fruit with patience.
Patience is a fruit of the Spirit. It absolutely is. And I know that has not ever been a big thing that I have, is patience. I don't know of many people who have patience.
Comes
Doctors.
as you grow.
Yeah.
Doctors.
Well, I wanted to bring to your attention, I know that we're getting close to wrapping up here, something that I found curious about Abraham. You know, he gets some wood and splits it and decides that he's going to take his wood with him. You know, he's packing this wood on the donkey. Do you find it curious that he is coming from a place where, frankly, there's not a lot of wood, and going to a place where there is a lot of wood, and yet he feels the need to take it with him?
These are the things that are written of me.
I think that is true. I think that it is a prophetic picture that we needed to, because he carries the wood with him on the donkey, presumably. And then he tells, you donkey and you two servants who came with him, his young men. I think there's a mystery there as well with the donkey and the two young men. I don't know, but it seems like it. That he says, you guys stay here, and then he puts the wood on Isaac's back to carry it up the mountain. I think that's clearly a prophetic picture of the Messiah, Yeshua, carrying the wood for the sacrifice on his own back. But I think it might also have a little bit of a spiritual principle here for us in that it really kind of talks about what we've been talking about here for a few minutes here, is that there was preparation made for spiritual sacrifice, that he did some work in advance to chop this wood and to tie it up and to carry it all the way. This is a 50-mile journey, and it took him 3 days to get there. So he had to do some spiritual work in preparation for this sacrifice. And that really does apply to us, in that we do need to do some spiritual work in order to make our bodies a living sacrifice to the Messiah and to God, in that we need to be found in his word, understanding it, having our ears opened and our eyes open to hear the word, to see what he's doing in our lives, to be praying continuously. I was struck repeatedly. I kept reading Luke chapter 11 several times this week, and which the Messiah says, pray continuously that you be found worthy to escape all these things that are coming upon the earth.
And to stand before the Son.
And to stand before the Son of Man. I found that passage to be it was hitting me rather hard this week, and I just kept reading it over and over, and I thought, I need to pray for that, because I think that there's a certain bit of fear that comes with knowing that we're at the end of the age. And I know that all of you believe that we are at the end of the age. However close we are, I don't know, but it's probably closer than we'd want to give credit to. But there is going to be terror and great fear. And it says in that same passage, men are fainting from fear and seeking death because of the trepidation that has come upon them as they realize the times that they're living in. But that we need to pray that we be found worthy to escape. Worthy to escape. Somebody is going to be worthy to escape. Shouldn't it be you? I would like for it to be you. I'd like for it to be me. What does it mean to be found worthy of escape? What do we need to do? What do we need to say? Are we supposed to be...
We're going to be prepared to sacrifice.
Be prepared to sacrifice the things that you love for the things that you love more. Angela, I apologize. Tracy.
That thing about the fear of the end of the age, I heard some guy talking about that this week, and I was sick and laying in bed, and all I could do was listen to stuff. And he pointed something out. I was like, oh, that was me. He said when you're going to have a baby, you don't have expectant mothers sitting around going, oh, the labor, it's going to be so bad. It's the labor, and like, because this earth is about to transition, or give birth. And the labor pains, that stuff in Revelations, it sounds no fun. I mean, we have so many Christians sitting around just, oh, the labor, instead of the baby, paint the room, get the crib, we should be excited about what comes after that. It's just labor.
Yeah.
But
good point.
But when I was expecting, I was dreading labor.
No, I understand. Tracy?
I was going to say, when you said that worthy to escape, there's really no way to know about what Hebrew word he was using for sure. But I was just looking at the scripture this week that says, whoever calls in the name of Yahweh shall be saved. Well, that word is escape when you look at the meaning of that word.
Okay. Rescued,
so,
escaped.
Yeah,
sure.
so whoever calls in the name of Yahweh shall be saved or escape. But that doesn't mean just saying Jesus or whatever the verbal. You need to understand what his name is.
And that's not it's not a magical incantation where
you need
you're...
to know him, and that's why he says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, well, they just called on your name, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he does the will of my Father in heaven.
Yeah.
But it was so cool because I looked at when Yahweh called Moses up to the mountain, and he came up with the second tablet, said, I'm going to write it again, the same words that were on the first one. And he says, and then I'm going to proclaim, same word, call in the name of the Lord, my name to you. And he tells you what it is. It's all these attributes. It's his character. It's his authority. All these merciful, wonderful things. Truth, love, mercy, and
gracious,
exactly. And he does not let the guilty go unpunished.
That's right.
I mean, it's just like awesome.
It is. It's really powerful. Natalie?
Well, and that's what Abraham was doing with Isaac, if you read it, because Abraham knew what a burnt offering what an acceptable one was. It's not an unclean anything.
Right.
So being told to sacrifice your son, he's like, okay, obviously that's not what's gonna happen here, but I'll obey. For Isaac's sake is probably what he was thinking.
Sure.
So he takes him up there, and Isaac doesn't fight it. He's
No.
like, where's the lamb?
Yeah.
And he's like, don't worry, provide it. He lets himself be bound and
Yeah.
laid on the altar because he knows that's not what's gonna happen. Let's just do this and see.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
we've sacrificed not sacrificed like a sacrifice, but slaughtered both sheep and goats. They go totally differently. Not even close to the same. A lamb does not cry, fight it, goes willingly every single time. A goat does not.
Interesting.
It screams and hollers and kicks and fusses the entire time.
And isn't that interesting that he separates sheep from goats?
Yes.
I mean, it was like, it blows your mind.
Yeah.
That's something interesting.
And I think that's a good picture of what I was thinking about when you were talking about escape. Because we have to wrap our mind around what that means.
Well, he was saying in that same passage, he who seeks to save his life will lose it.
And that's what people are doing. They
That's
want
a goat.
to be saved. That's the gospel message that people are giving,
Well,
is to be saved.
the picture that we're seeing in so many of these stories from Old Testament to New, people being enslaved, people being put in prison, people being given the opportunity to escape from prison but staying for the sake of others, right? That they're at peace with their lot.
Yeah. You know what's fascinating about that same section in Luke 8 was when he talks about some of you will be turned over to death, and then just 2 sentences later he says, not a hair of your head will fall to the ground. Like, what is going on here? Some of you are going to be put to death, and yet not a hair of your head will fall to the ground. So you will never taste death. My people who believe in me will never see death. I mean, it's so strange to me. There's a deep thing there that I'm not exactly aware of what's going on there. But as Gracie was talking about earlier, what does this mean for us? Good thing that maybe we can just wrap this up here. It is so crucial to be setting aside our own desires. And that I think that we can sometimes conflate this and make it bigger or more ethereal or more spiritual than it really is or needs to be. That it really does need to come down to the standard rubber meets the road, like saying to your wife, I'm sorry. Like being humble with your boss who you disagree with. Placing yourself in submission is so challenging for us. Whatever the situation is, whether it's with a coworker or a boss situation, whether it's with your husband and wife, whether it's with your children, being humble and being willing to submit it's such a rare commodity these days. I see it everywhere around me. I know that if you're in the business world, you see it out there in the business world, and you wonder how anything is getting done, period, with just employees sniping and biting at each other and having no respect for the people in authority, and the people who have authority are not using it wisely. And it's really, really challenging out there in the world with just people throwing off, like it says in Psalms 1, let's cast off their burdens, why do the nations rage? Everyone is doing that. And how much can we stick out like sore thumbs by simply being willing to serve, by simply placing our needs and our interests and our desires below someone else's? Like somebody who wants something, it's just about service, being willing to be a servant. I know, as a business owner, I have to be involved in customer service all the time. I know that when you are wanting service from someone, when do you want it? You want it now. That's just service. How do you want it? You want it the best way, for the cheapest way possible, and you want it now. You got to think about that in relation to every aspect of your life. And it's so critical, especially for us husbands and wives in our relationships, to be able to submit ourselves to each other. So challenging.
But you will reap the rewards. If
Yes,
you do.
you
And not
absolutely
just
will.
in a marriage, but everywhere.
Yeah, you will absolutely reap rewards everywhere. And I think we need to be examples. We can no longer be just like for decades you would see these surveys that were done of church congregations where they had the exact same incidence of divorce and fornication and, you know, problems with drugs and alcohol, and it was just everything that was happening out in the world was just duplicated inside the walls of the church. And that is just not the way that it should be. And I hope that we'll begin to, or if we haven't already, you know, begin to consider seriously what it means to be a servant. And that is so challenging to humble ourselves, but it's so necessary. Let's remember to do that. Anything else for the good of the
I
order?
just want to ask you real quick, what mountain did you say that you're thinking this was taking place on? Or last time did we mention something about that?
Moriah?
Well, not Moriah, but then it, you know what I'm saying? Like, was it a representative of another mountain? Like, it's being called something else, but it's,
Oh, yeah. Well,
Place of the skull.
that's what I'm worried. Like, can we
The
connect
same
some
words,
dots?
yeah.
I don't know. There's a lot of speculation about that, but please, if you want to connect some dots
I
and
don't know.
talk a
I'm
little bit.
just after reading Exodus 3, I'm wondering, is this the same place? Because Yahweh sees in the mountain, and that's what's happening in Exodus 3 with this burning bush. And then Abraham saw my day, and he was glad. Is this the same mountain that Messiah was on? Was this the same mountain that Abraham saw the burning, or was the burning bush?
Right.
I mean, I don't know. I just
Well,
didn't know. If
and you know, that's a good question, and I think that one of the commentaries that I was reading in regards to this was kind of talking about the same thing. It was like, well, where was the Messiah crucified, and what is this Moriah talking about? Is this talking about the temple? Well, no. Mount Moriah is actually the whole series of mountains here. It's not just this particular top of this one mountain that has a threshing floor on top. That's not Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah is this whole mountain chain, which can include where the temple is. It could also include the Mount of Olives, place of the skull, around down in the city of David. I mean, that whole mountain chain, I think, is referenced as Mount Moriah. It's not a particular singular mountain in a mountain chain. So I think that might help a little bit.
And that fits with, it says, go to the land of Moriah.
Right.
And offer on one of the mountains.
Yes.
Because if that's the case, I mean, if this place where Moses saw something, the same thing, there's something going on. There's something to be seen.
Yeah. There's something to be seen.
And the first, Abraham sees the first coming,
Right.
the ram caught in the thicket and the sacrifice. And I'm wondering if Moses is seeing something about the Spirit. I will baptize them with fire. Like if he's seeing something else on that mountain.
Sure.
You know, that's not physical, but it's more spiritual.
Yeah.
I don't
And
know,
I think so, totally.
speculate.
And we talked about this last time, I think, was when Yeshua was saying, you know, in the book of John, you know, your father Abraham saw my day and he was glad. That's here. That's tied in here somewhere, I think. It's got to be here.
Chapter
So.
of seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Anything else? Excellent. Excellent. Well, let us pray and we'll fellowship.